What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome to episode number 14 of Domiciled, the podcast that explores the subculture of truck drivers as well as logistics professionals bringing their stories to the masses. And I'm your host, Scott Cleary. Let's say hello to Paul quick before sending over to our guest. What's up, buddy? How's Oliver doing? For anybody who doesn't know, Oliver is Paul's cat, who he loves dearly, but is constantly driving him insane. So how's the cat?
He's doing some weird thing where he stares into the teapot. It's not on. He's just like a couple inches from it, staring at it.
Like trying to challenge it, maybe.
I don't know, man. I don't. You try to like ascribe human qualities to a cat, and it's they're kind of just derpy, man. They just kind of do stuff.
They're really, a little derpy, but so agile.
Yeah, surprisingly. It's weird. They're agile enough to get themselves in trouble too, which is. But yeah, man, what's up with you? How's Florida?
Florida's good, man. You know, it's I do think it's getting warmer like every year. Like I saw a post that I had on Facebook from like 2014, and I moved here in October, and it was like, oh, you know, like beautiful out, but it's like too cool for the pool, like too chilly to go out in the pool, right? And it's still like 82 degrees during the day right now. It's cooler in the mornings and evenings, which is nice, but it's still not like
I want it. Too cool for the pool is.
Yeah, too cool. Yeah, it didn't say that. I didn't rhyme it that well then.
I just want to know a temperature range.
Like, what's mine? We talking water or outside?
Outside. Oh, yeah, the water's.
So for outside, for me, it's the water temp, right? So outside, I don't care. Okay, I'll answer your question quick. Once the water gets into like, I think it's like once it's into like the 60s, it's pretty cool. Like that's getting cold for water.
But then what's the outside temperature that's too cool?
Oh, so again, as long as the water is like warm, I don't care. Right? Like hot tub and freezing weather, like whatever. Like I've done. But I've done a polar plunge. Like I've done that in Massachusetts like 2 or 3 years in a row. I'm talking like New Year's Day. Like everybody gets together, runs in the ocean.
Feels like you're dodging my question. What temperature outside air? Let's assume that water is right above your minimum level.
Okay.
What outside air temperature, Scott?
I'd say I'd say once it gets into like the low 70s, high 60s, then it starts getting cold. Like once you get out of the water, then you're like, oh, like you feel it. It. But for me, again, it's really about the water temp because that's what gets you.
I was starting to think you were going to be like, yeah, once it hits 80, if it gets below 80.
Oh, no.
I thought you were going to be one of those.
That's my girlfriend. She's like freezing if it's high 70s and humid at night here, she's freezing. Like you're from Philly. Like, what's wrong with you?
Well,
she's been down here like 20 years though.
I think it wears off though, because I grew up in the South, moved up north, lived in a couple different places, have been around snow and cold a lot, and I used to be able to handle heat. But like I think I was telling you, I was down in Texas earlier this year, and I just remember being like, this is awful. Like Fort Worth.
Yeah.
In the middle of the summer is like
just dripping.
Yeah, but it's awful. It's awful.
Like, you know Florida, right? Yeah, we do.
It's wild. Yeah.
Well, crazy. I've had hurricanes.
That's fair.
And we were talking about your cat. I was trying to go down. So back to the cat. What's the weirdest thing he's done this week? Stare down the teapot, or like, cause you have like a story a day about Oliver.
Yeah. He didn't really do anything crazy today. The other day, he like found a way to open up my rice cooker and was just like huffing the steam. But he wasn't eating it because it was too hot. But he was just like kind of with the steam and it's coming to his face.
Just wafting.
I'm trying to think about what else. He screwed up and was on top of the fridge and pushed the freezer door open and fell to the ground. That was about a week ago.
On his feet, though.
No, not on his feet. He tumbled. He like bounced off stuff. It wasn't good. I was like, are you okay? And he seemed very upset. He's got an obsession with peas. Like if you cook like green peas, he's like he will. If you leave it unattended, he will just a big mouthful. No chewing, just
just gets after the peas.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I looked it up. I guess a lot of their food has pea protein in it, so maybe his brain is like, I want
smells
that.
it.
Yeah, because he'll pass over the chicken. I got chicken thighs cooked, and he's like, I don't want that. I want the green peas.
Really, not the dark.
I don't know what it is, man. He's a weird little guy.
The animals are tough. I mean, I don't have the dog anymore, but like I remember when I did, we had to feed her, like we fed her the kibble, but as well, we always gave her rice and cut up chicken every meal, and she got organic chicken. I was like, but she ate better than I. She ate better than I did at the time.
Eating better than me, man.
Oh my god! Speaking of, I'm dying. I was meant to tell you this earlier. I'm dying for a meatball sub right now. Like I've been craving one for like 2-3 days, and I'm doing my best.
The meatball sub is crucial. I actually think it's the cornerstone of America. At least one of them, because there's a couple of corners, but I think the meatball sub,
yeah,
from like a deli, like a mom and pop.
Oh yeah,
yeah. That like America runs on Dunkin'. It's like no, America runs on like a hole in the wall, like truck stop meatball sub that somebody can just grab.
That's what I grew up in. Wasn't a truck stop, but my parents they had
I grew up in a truck stop.
Yeah, I was born in a truck stop. Given how long our next guest has been in logistics and freight, you like that intro, you like that transition there. So, but given how long he's been in transportation logistics, he might have been born in a truck stop. So I think it's time we bring him on because I was about to go down the rabbit hole of my parents' restaurants and stuff.
Oh yeah, we can keep that for a special Scott themed episode.
Yeah, I'll just get on and talk. Like, anyways, though, our next guest, as I said, boasts 50 years in transportation logistics, dating back to 74, so 50 years on the dot. When he began his career as a driver out of Dallas, Texas. Speaking of that Fort Worth heat, I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that with him as well. He's held positions as a driver, trainer, owner-op with up to 17 trucks and 25 employees at one time, which he sold in the 90s, the last great decade, and has since worked in brokerage. We are amped to dig into his story today in order to learn more and hear about some of those great experiences. Welcome to the pod, Drake Sliver. How we doing? Excited to have you on.
Thanks. Hey, I'm excited to be on. Really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it was our pleasure. And I forgot to ask, did I pronounce it right? I went with what I assumed for the last
Yeah, it's actually Sliver.
It is Sliver.
Yeah, it is Sliver. But, I get silver, shiver, you get stuff spelled every which way.
Yeah, but I'm really good about names and getting them right.
Apparently
and
not.
I meant no, except right on it's recorded. I might just bleep that out. Be like Drake Sliver. No, but like I screwed up. It's what it is. I forgot to ask, and I was like, it's probably just. I meant it. I just feel silly. Anyway, Drake, you've been doing some form of logistics for 50 years, starting back in 74. Like I said, talk to us a little bit how you got into it, and tell us about that Dallas heat.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Dallas heat. That's why we have air conditioning, man. We live in the air conditioning all summer long.
Yep.
It's what it is. We'll talk about more about that later. Getting into trucking, that was something right after my military career. So got out of the Air Force. Was stationed in Fort Worth, actually, at Carswell Air Force Base. I needed a job. A friend of mine said, "Hey, Laurel Wheat Baking Company in Dallas is hiring." So I ended up working in shipping and receiving and befriended one of our truck drivers. And I was just joking with him one day. I said, "When are you going to teach me how to drive one of those?" He said, "You buy me a case of beer and I'll teach you how to drive one." He just joked around. Didn't take me serious at all. And I kept after him. And he did a local route. It was tractor trailer, back in the days of cab over Peterbilt's and stuff like that. That's what he drove around the Dallas-Fort Worth area at night, delivering bread, all the bread products and everything like that to the thrift stores that Oroweed had. So he said, "I'll tell you what, you show up on your day off at 6 o'clock and I'll take you with me." So I went with him. His route was 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. So he'd always end up back at the bakery in Dallas. After he reloaded once, he would, go to Fort Worth, Arlington, Fort Worth, and take empty racks back to Dallas. 2 a.m. in the morning, coming around Loop 820 in Fort Worth, he pulled over the side of the road and said, "It's your turn." I'd never driven a truck before in my life.
You're going to learn.
You steer it, I'll shift it. I had a 13-speed Eaton floor transmission in it, and a V8 Detroit 2-cycle diesel, and away we went. And he was shifting it, and I was steering it. 2 a.m. in the morning. He looked over at me and said, "Don't you think you better slow down a little bit?" I was doing about 72 miles an hour around Loop 8. Humming. Never driven a tractor trailer in my life, you know. And I was hooked, instantly hooked. And I kept after, and he kept taking me with him and on longer trips. And finally, I took a road test. Nobody even asked me for a background. I didn't even have a driver's license for it. I mean, back
you didn't have the CDL yet?
No CDLs. It was a chauffeur's license. And I didn't even have that. So to get a chauffeur's license, all you had to do was drive a U-Haul truck around the block with a Texas State Trooper in it, and you got a chauffeur's license.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, let's back this up.
Back this up. So this is before really we had kind of the deregulation of a lot of, because back then my understanding, I'm a young guy, right? But my understanding is it was a lot more like Teamster union. There wasn't a lot of, there definitely wasn't brokerage type deals going on like it is today. It was a lot more motor carrier and then whoever the customer was.
Yes, this is 7 years before deregulation.
Interesting.
Right. 7 years
before you went through that. Man, I'm going to have to ask you about that later. I'm a big nerd for history in general.
Yeah. And a lot of guys get their start because they are on a farm or a ranch or whatever, and they deliver grain, with their own trucks, things like that, grow their own product, and they drive when they're 14 or 10 or whatever, on the farm. But this was just about as close to that as you could get. And I took the road test, and they passed me. I never filled out an application. There was no history of ever me driving anywhere. And you'll never see that again. But I never had an accident either. I mean, it was, I took a road test in 4 o'clock Dallas traffic, pulling a 50-foot trailer around Dallas traffic, and had very limited experience. Didn't hit anything. That was key, I guess. And I started in on that other driver's route. And, I got bored after a few months and thought, I want to see the country. And it just took off from there, and, one company after the next, and finally did end up, driving Teamsters.
So you're a Teamster too. All right. Did you like being a Teamster more than being, part of a private company or independent, or how did that relate, I guess?
Well, it was the money. Right. So, so I actually started driving for Schneider in 1976. Okay. And Schneider only had 500 trucks at that time out of Green Bay. And we had, there were terminals. So we had a Dayton, Ohio terminal where I live close to, and we were 957 local out of Springfield, Ohio. And it was a union position. So we had representation, and we had a contract with Schneider. And I made tons of money. We're talking, I'm 23 years old, and I'm probably making the equivalent of $135,000 today in today's world. Yeah. And young, single, living with my mom and dad on the weekends when I was home, had no expenses. All I was doing was stuffing money in the bank all the time. It was incredible.
Can I ask you a question about that time frame?
Yeah, sure.
So that time frame that's like you're talking about contracts and all that. I mean, that's Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you guys knew each other.
No,
are you buddies?
But what was your perception of Hoffa when you were young and had that job that was paying really well? Because unions now, they get in the news and for different reasons, and it's a completely different environment than it was then. But I'm just curious on what your thoughts were on that. I mean, is that some folks that you looked up to at that time, or were you, what was your opinion?
Well, not so much Jimmy Hoffa, but the people that were what I consider a ladder to Jimmy Hoffa. And that would have been the immediate drivers. There were 50 of us in Dayton. And, your senior drivers were at the top of the board. So they got the pick of the loads and where they ran and things like that. And then I would go to union meetings in Springfield. And, as a young guy, I was trying to figure out the whole web of the union. How does this work? And how do you get to be a union president? And how, and Hoffa was like so far out of my reach of thought that I really didn't get a grasp of Jimmy Hoffa at that time, other than he was the kingpin, of the union.
Literally.
Literally. And I had family experience with unions because my uncle was president of the Retail Merchants Association in Detroit. So like Kmart, any kind of retail, he was president of that union that represented all those people at that time. So, we had a little bit of family background in the union, but the people that I looked up to were the senior drivers in Dayton. And they were like, oh man, I got to follow this guy because he's successful in this industry and he's doing it the right way. He's a family man, married, he's solid, and that I really looked up to him. His name was Dave Smith. And I don't know if Dave's still with us or not, but he taught me how to navigate the West Coast, because most of the time I was a Midwest and East Coast driver, but you had to, at Schneider, your truck had to be plated for the West Coast in order to go out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you had sorry, I just get excited about this stuff. So
no, please.
It's so much different than the folks I've talked to now, and where there's somebody that's kind of a peer but has more seniority, right? Because it's kind of a flat piece here. This is a manager, this is an individual contributor, but he's this, this guy is willing to take a younger, newer driver under their wing and show them some things. That's something that, Scott, I don't know about you, but I don't think we see that too much just in the workforce in general nowadays. But, it sounds like you really had an opportunity to learn from him. And I'm sure there were other people as well that helped you out along the way, because it sounds like there was a lot of camaraderie. And you guys were probably pretty proud to be drivers at that time. Extremely.
We would actually travel in packs.
Yeah.
So there were, if we were going eastbound across the Pennsylvania Turnpike, there might be 5 or 6 Schneider drivers in a row, and we were all running really together. Cool. And we were all talking on the radio, and we would go to a higher channel to get off of channel 19, and we'd all talk, and the time went by so fast, it just made the miles melt away. And the thing about it is, here's what would happen. We heard if we were going east, a westbound truck would tell us, hey, there's a Schneider driver broken down in the rest area, this mile marker. All 5 of us would pull over. All 5 trucks would pull in. I can remember we gave him cigarettes. We gave him coffee. We took care of him. He was a brother, and then we called Schneider, and, we'd go to the truck stop, use the payphone. Nobody had cell phones, of course.
Right.
And we'd use payphone, call Schneider and tell him where he was at, and they'd send somebody out to fix him up. But not just one driver would stop. We'd all stop.
That's awesome. And so, funny enough, a conversation, I think it's 2 episodes back. The topic was really centered around that there's a lack of respect for not just the blue collar worker, but specifically the driver lately. What do you think, given how proud, like you said, we were proud. It was a brotherhood. I'm sure the being in a union helped, but you would think that amongst drivers, there is still, or should still be, a level of camaraderie and brotherhood, sisterhood as well. You got ladies out there too. Where do you think do you believe that there's a deterioration? And if so, why do you think it's occurred?
I think one of the reasons is the mandates for the electronic logs. And I say that because that means people are sleeping and operating at all times of day and night. Right. So, you might hit the truck stop at 2 a.m. and take your break. Somebody else is there at 4 a.m., noon, 6 p.m. So, you don't have like a herd of drivers coming into a truck stop and headed for the restaurant to share a cup of coffee and have 6 drivers there together that are getting ready to go your way. Like, hey, where are you all going? Hey, we're going to Jersey City. Okay, hey, let's all run together. Because everybody's at different points, during the day. I think that's part of it. I think it was a gradual thing, right? It wasn't an overnight thing. It was a gradual thing. But also, hardly anybody talks on CB radio. It was,
We've heard that.
Yeah, and most guys, and I myself included, when it got later into a career, or if I took a trip with somebody, you're throwing it on Sirius XM and listening to sports and other things like that, just so the miles melt away. And it became controversial to be on the radio. Just too many different talking points and then arguments, things like that. Instead of camaraderie, it got into something else. And it could have been in 1976 or 1974. There could be silence on the radio. You wouldn't hear very much, especially out west. It was out west. My truck didn't even have a radio. Didn't even have an AM radio in it at Schneider. You had to put your own radio in there. And the only thing you could pick up at night out west was WBAP out of Fort Worth, because it's 100,000 watt clear channel radio at midnight. So you would listen to the Bill Mack Road Show at midnight, WBAP, Fort Worth, Texas.
Can't forget it, I guess.
No.
That's so you talk about the ELDs, and then and just the different points, that makes sense. How about the overall just attitude towards drivers, or that maybe again drivers have amongst themselves? It's just tension at stops, or just how people, the public, looks at drivers.
Right. But boy, back in the day, we were just treated like kings. We really were. Yes, I had to touch freight. I actually had to unload 22 and a half tons of Campbell's soup off the floor and palletize it, and then go drive after that, after a delivery. Stuff like that drivers were the mules. You unloaded your own truck. Sometimes you loaded your own truck. But Schneider hauled a lot of paper. So we hauled large rolls of paper, things like that. All I had to do is back in, give the delivery person, the receiver, my bill of lading. They'd say, "Oh, driver, you can go out and sit in your truck if you like to," and they'd ask you if you wanted a cup of coffee, things like that. But gradually things came, I don't know what precipitated it, but things came between receivers, and maybe there were laws and safety issues. Back then, there were no dock locks on docks to keep drivers from pulling away and, the forklift driver going off the dock because the driver pulled out without checking, things like that. So I think the carelessness, some of it was driver related, and just the whole industry as laws and more regulations came out. It was challenging for drivers, because then back in the day, you did what the dispatcher told you to do, even if it was illegal, to keep your job.
Wow. So the dispatchers had a pretty big, influence over what happened. Obviously they're dispatching, they're communicating between the shipper, the receiver, and yourself, but they had that much of a influence on even just what you did and how you did it.
Sure. They never asked how many hours you had, because a lot of times you wouldn't fill a logbook out until the weekend.
Right.
That's supposed to be kept up every few hours, updated. But you ran and ran and ran and ran until you almost ready to drop, and then you went to bed. That's kind of the MO that drivers did back in the day, and a lot of companies misused that and ran drivers even more tired. And of course that leads to accidents and things like that. So, but I think little by little, there were a lot of different things that came into play. Like I said, rules and regulations, maybe some drivers took advantage of things they shouldn't have. And it kind of all over the years aggregated into what we're seeing today. Although I think for me personally, I think there might be a comeback of, really drivers being professional, because we're starting to see some really good driver pay out there now. Drivers are starting a lot better pay. And so now, drivers can be at a different point in their life and provide a lot better for their families than just 10 years ago.
Okay, well, so that's good news. A little maybe a silver lining to how crazy things have been the last couple of years as far as it being shipper centric or shipper, I guess it's the word I'm looking for here. I guess to the advantage of the shipper as far as rates go. So I think this probably segues well into a topic you mentioned wanting to speak about. So you talked about the ELDs, but also the discussion around, or even maybe use of, in some cases, speed limiters or governors on trucks. So I'm just maybe naive to it. Is it something that's just being talked about, or is it being used in some instances now?
Well, it's being talked about for sure. I mean, it's, in beginning legislation, it hasn't really passed anything major that I've heard of, but it's all rumblings, and it's, people have different feelings about it. I have different feelings about it. And some of that goes back to driver recruitment and also driver retention, but it also is about profitability. So somewhere along the line between driver recruitment, retention, and profitability, there's going to have to be some kind of, you're going to have to reach a number. If that's going to happen, if there is going to be a speed quote limiter, someone's going to have to come up with a good number. Swift, back in the day, this is a long time ago, at one time, they had their trucks limited to 55 miles per hour.
I think they still have that.
And they may have, it's a little bit more than 55 now, I think. But back in the day, that came about. And, it was for a truck that's not limited at all, that wasn't an electronic engine. It had a manual fuel pump on it instead of an electronic fuel pump. Then you could run as fast as it would run. A lot of trucks would run 90, 95 miles an hour. I mean, that's.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. Easily. And there were many large carriers like Montfort Trucking out of Greeley, Colorado, that hauled fresh beef. And that's why we called the left lane the Montfort lane. You better get out of the Montfort lane because they're coming through. You might be doing 75 and a Montfort truck would pass you like you're up on jacks. So it's that you better get out of the way. And they were running team drivers, and they'd run from Colorado to Boston and New York City, just as fast as they could get there.
Yeah. Is that because they need to keep the product as fresh as possible, or they just throw fast? Yeah. And they provided a service that nobody else was providing. If a shipper said, "Gosh, you can get my freight there in 18 hours or whatever," they're all over that. The other trucking companies are telling me 3 days, and you're telling me 18 hours. Well, shoot, we're going to use you. So and that's, it comes down to communication and service. Now you're talking about servicing a customer and giving them something that someone else isn't offering. That wasn't so safe back then, but people did it. But when I had my trucks, they were governed at 68. I tried to come up with 68, but a lot of other fleets were letting their drivers run at 75. And there's numerous arguments over the exact speed, but when you start to look at maintenance issues at certain speeds on a graph, your maintenance costs go up dramatically. When you get above 68, especially I see trucks, and I get behind trucks in my car that are doing 80. So that's, but that's their choice to run that speed, but you're paying a cost for it too.
Yeah. Hey, Drake, I got a question. So if we can pull back, you've experienced being in this industry for so long, you've experienced two big things I think that I'd be really curious about. I'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about is one is that we talked a little bit about, pre-deregulation from starting out as a union driver to post. And then the other thing is, we talk about pre-ELD, post-ELD. And I'm not as familiar with some of the differences of pre-deregulation and not, but I am familiar with folks that I know that have said, ELDs, does it cause accidents? Does it make it easier? Are there more infractions or less infractions or people, et cetera? There's people on both sides of that, but I'd be curious if we could start a little bit with some of your pieces on kind of what it was like on that cutover point and then coming to now. And maybe, a pre and post world with ELDs. If you've got any insight on that, I'd really love to hear it.
Sure. But it was nobody liked to do logbooks. I mean, that was, a lot of people carried 2 logbooks, yeah. So to me, that seemed like a lot of work. And I tried to keep mine up as much as possible, but there were times and gaps where, I should have, but didn't, just because it wasn't being enforced. It was very rare to, as long as you were watching what your weights were, and when we're getting back into that area, we're not talking about 80,000 pound gross. We're talking about 73,280 was the gross weight back then. So in the 70s.
Made you do some math.
Yeah, but you made sure that you were, scaled properly. And, you have to do that today as well. But it's one of those things where you do it today, then you have to manipulate that ELD, right? So and everything has to be accounted for. So you're doing inputs every time that you stop, you get fuel, you scale, you take a break. Every time you do it, you've got to keep up. It's a habit that you have to form. We didn't have those habits. It was more like, I'm going to look at and believe me, there was no GPS. Your GPS was a map. You had an atlas, and that's how you planned your route. And still today, atlases are valid in route planning. So because of your ELD, if you don't route plan, you may end up at a point where you're going to be out of hours, but you're not to a safe destination yet. And now you're in violation. So, but routing was, hey, I know this truck stop and I want to get there because they had good food, or there's another reason you want to get there. And that still holds true today. Guys have their favorite places. But then there's such things as fuel optimization programs that a lot of companies have. And that, when it comes across your ELD, and, it's going to tell you, driver, you're going to stop at this truck stop, you're going to take on 40 gallons, and then, you might, right, because maybe it's a higher price fuel, and your company doesn't want to pay that super high price, but the 40 gallons is going to get you to a preferred stop where you're going to fill up. So they don't want you to run out of fuel, but they're trying to get you where they have their biggest discounts and bonuses, things like that, because they're trying to hit a gallon amount. The more gallons you buy, the more discounts you get. So it's all volume. And a lot of big companies, anyhow, they do hedging, right? They do that, and they trade. They're doing trades and things like that for fuel. So commodity traders, and they're hedging fuel prices and things like that. But when you get to ELDs, there's I will say this, if you're on a dedicated route for like Ford Motor Company, other things like that, it's dedicated, you're loaded one way, you're empty going the other, and you have stopping points. ELDs are a piece of cake. They really are, because it only takes a couple of trips to learn that route and where you can stop. So it just becomes automatic. I ran a route from Del Rio, Texas to Louisville, Kentucky, and I knew exactly where I would go. I'd leave Del Rio if I could, and I had the hours, I'd try to get up to Fort Worth, and I'd stop outside of Fort Worth at a pilot truck stop, and I'd take my break there. And then from there, I might make it to Jackson, Tennessee. And then from Jackson, I'd make it to Louisville. So I knew exactly how many miles, how long it would take me, and it just became a habit. And then I would be at Dakota Integrated Logistics in Louisville and unload. I knew how many hours I had and where I could make it back to. So on those dedicated routes, it's really easy for ELD. But when you're just running what I call irregular route, common carrier, any route, then you may not be familiar with the next place that you need to be. So it makes it a little bit harder.
Gotcha. No, that's a great answer. Appreciate it, Paul. Any follow up to that on your end?
No, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I hadn't taken into account commodities traders, and that's funny because I can see the Chicago Board of Trade from behind me, right? And there's a lot of that goes on over there. But one of the things that I guess I didn't take into account of is it sounds like really one of the things that's changed a lot is the amount of. It sounds like we went through a deregulation period, right? And we've said that a couple of times, but then came a ton of other constraints. Kind of like what you were mentioning earlier. I have an ELD that's route optimizing, it's fuel optimizing, it's keeping me within my hours. It's it's almost mandating or dictating what I'm doing. To the point where you don't really have the control or the opportunity where you might be trying to meet up with a friend, right? And, like it used to be that you've shared with us, and now it's like, oh man, well, I've been told I have to stop at this gas station. I can't meet you at that pilot, so I'll catch you on the way back. Or I imagine a lot of people now, instead of a CB radio, they're on, cell phone or some sort of, wireless hands-free communication to chat with folks to keep themselves busy.
Yeah, it would be hard to run with somebody now because you may have 3 hours left until you have to take your break, and maybe they just started fresh. Mm-hmm. So, you might get a couple hours to run together, and that's it. You're going to split up. But so those days of me running at Schneider with Dave Smith, that would almost have been impossible with ELDs. Unless we were assigned to exact loads for the same locations, and we would have we would have had to take our break and our 34 hours at the same time, at the same place in order to run it.
Mm-hmm. So then going into, we've talked ELDs. What was the big changeover switch between moving from what I imagine was a Teamster's job over to, did you stay with Schneider? Did you move to another organization? Tell me a little bit about that cutover going into the 80s and, late 80s, early 90s.
Sure. Yeah, I did make a change. I've always been curious about the different, sectors of trucking and what it was like. So I got into produce. Ooh. And I got into produce. Drove for a company, of course, it's not around anymore, but it was Sam Tanksley Trucking out of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And there were a lot of companies back then that went out of business when deregulation hit. Tom Inman, there's a whole bunch of them that we used to run together. But we'd run to California, and I remember, loading strawberries and taking strawberries out of California, running teams up to Toronto, Canada, and delivering up in Toronto. Oh, wow. Yeah. And, it was easy to cross into Canada back then. Mm-hmm. A short inspection of the load that you had on was about it. And then we'd run up to A&P in Toronto and deliver. And then we'd take anything we could, anything that dispatch could find to get us back to California to reload. I even picked up a load of ironing boards one time and took them to California.
Boards?
Ironing an entire trailer
like a Woolworths or something. Jeez.
Yeah, that's crazy. Coming out of like I think that's one of the things you can do. You can go Ontario to Ontario, Ontario, Canada. Were you at that point, was this, you were driving ambient dry van? Were you doing refrigerated? What temperature control? Yeah,
a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah. I had done a short stint of flatbed in Longview, Texas, right before I started driving for Schneider. So I got a little bit of taste of flatbed, but man, in Texas heat, throwing tarps in 105-degree weather. Look, I used to work in a steel mill in Lone Star, Texas, so I know what heat's like. But those were days when your old oil tarps, they were heavy. I was young and stupid, so I did the work. So.
You're like, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'll do it.
You
How much you gonna pay me?
So not only that, but you also had mentioned learning to navigate mountain passes without an engine brake when driving through the West Coast. So break that down in layman's terms a bit. Tell us more about what that engine brake is, what it does, and what not having it makes you do.
Yeah, well, that's one thing, Dave, my mentor, told me. He said, watch out. There's a lot of trucks out here that have engine brakes. So it just puts back pressure on the engine and actually turns the engine into a big air compressor. Basically, that's what it's doing. So, and that's where you hear the rumble when guys let off the accelerator. You hear the rumble.
Oh, wow, that's what that is.
If they have them engaged, that's what makes that sound. Okay. So it's the rumble of air coming out of the exhaust pipes from the engine, but it's not getting any fuel. It's just taking in air and compressing it. And so that causes back pressure and slows the engine, which slows the truck, right? Mm-hmm. And so most everybody, it's a 6-cylinder engine, but there's 3 heads, 3 sections, 1, 2, 3. So you have a 3-stage engine brake. And you can use 1, 2, or if you need the most power, you can do that. There are other kinds of brakes, but won't go into those. But they're not that popular. They're for super, super heavy haul. But Dave said, hey, now watch out. We're going to be on a mountain pass, and you're going to see these guys are flying down the hill, but they've got engine brakes, and we don't. So we don't. We don't. So, we would go down a lot of passes. There's Cajon coming down into Ontario, Canada. And at the bottom of Cajon is a weigh station. And so you come into the weigh station smoking your brakes, you're going to get fined, and you're going to spend a little time there, that you didn't want to spend. So we would have to gear down real slow, and then we would creep down these mountain passes, holding steady pressure on the brakes all the way down. And these trucks that ran California all the time, they were going down there, and you'd hear their engine brakes, coming down there, and they were able to, pass you pretty quick. But it took us forever to go down. There's one called Cabbage Pass out in Oregon. Again, if you run away on these mountain passes, you're going to have to take a truck run off somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And we were actually talking to Rob Carpenter a few episodes ago, and he had talked about a time where he didn't do his engine or his brake inspection. Like, he just didn't do his pre-check that well, because he said he got a little cocky. And he was going down a mountain pass, and he had taken a runaway before, and he didn't want to do it. So he ended up bombing down at like over 120 miles an hour in this truck. And I stopped, and I was so shocked. I was like, you want like, that's how fast I've gone in my car, and it's a 2-door. Like, that's just bonk, like in a semi. And he's like, oh, I'd already made peace, so that was dead. And he's like, he got to the bottom, and like you said, brakes just smoking, like nothing left.
Right.
And he was like, never again.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, it can sneak up on you, right? Cajon is steep, but the Grapevine over in California, north of LA, the Grapevine's steady. It's long, but it's steady. It's not that steep. And so one time I got a little cocky, like he did. Yeah. And I got up some pretty good speed. And I tried to slow it down, got, brakes hot, wasn't even down to the bottom, but it's straight shot. It's not, and there wasn't any traffic, fortunately for me. And I looked like a jet, with flames coming out of both engines down the bottom. And that was the last time. I said, never again. I'll never take any of these passes for granted. You have to know where they're at, and you have to respect them. Yeah.
And funny, you talked about the fire coming out, and he actually said he was on fire too, and he was hauling coal dust. He's like, I was just waiting to explode. So that's wild that to your point about that, and especially in the winter, right? Winter change or no change, and having to figure out, just like people don't even get, even brokers still don't even get. Like, I remember brokering freight, sending some out to the Pacific Northwest, and it was winter, and just remember like the rates just being astronomical, and just completely forgetting, because I live in Florida, that like the Pacific Northwest, like, dude, it's chains only. Like, it's not pretty up there. It's not flat, and it's mountainous, and it's cold, and it's icy. So yeah, it's like you forget about those things. You know, you only think about the beautiful pictures that people take or imagining yourself on the road. You don't think of the hardships, right? Oh, man.
Right. And the thing is, when you're in the mountains, weather changes rapidly. You know, I picked up a load of mulch in Idaho in one of my own trucks when I had my fleet. And it was a beautiful day. And I stopped for coffee at this one place. And the guy said, "You driving the truck out there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You better get out of here. We got a storm coming in." And I looked over the mountains and you could see it coming. And I probably got maybe an hour and up the road. Yeah, that was a mistake. I got in heavy, heavy, heavy snow. I had no chains.
So you should have stayed, is what you're saying?
No, I kept there's power dividers on trucks, and what locks in all of the, both axles. It's kind of like 4x4, but not really. And I just took it slow, and I had positive traction on that particular truck, and I made it over. But I could hear the chains on like yellow freight guys coming across the pass. You could hear, you could see people chaining up, and you could hear their chains as they were coming over. I had no chains.
So you're like FOMO, but also like for your life.
Yeah, I got to the truck stop at the bottom, and I had snow that was actually sticking straight off the back of my trailer, like 2 feet, like icicles. They were pointed straight out.
Holy crap.
It was incredible. Yeah,
That's insane.
Yeah, it was insane.
Insane. I mean, you're telling all these stories, and you've got such a. I almost feel like I'd want to have you come back on here and get even more in depth on, some of the experiences you've had, or really your thoughts on some of the changes in the industry. But, I always like to kind of, as we, wind down on these, is I always like to ask, with all your experience in the industry, is there anything, you mentioned having, I believe you said Dave being a really good mentor to you early on. Is there anything, if you were in a position to mentor some younger folks, that you'd tell some of the younger folks getting into this field now? Are there maybe 2 or 3 things that come to mind where it's like, from my experience, this is what you should know if you're getting into this space?
Right. And I've done that. I've been very fortunate over the past 10 years to occasionally, not full-time, but part-time, teach a freight broker class. And taught it. It's a week-long class. It started here in the Dallas area, and I've taught in Chicago and Atlanta, Denver, LA, all over. And that week-long class, I had truckers in my class. I've had everybody you can imagine from all kinds of different fields, but people who wanted to get into the industry and learn more about it, especially drivers. I told them, be patient. It's a craft that you've got to learn. Respect it. Be careful. You're going to go to a lot of places that are going to be great, but there's some places you need to be aware of, safety wise, for your own safety. And don't expect to get rich overnight, especially if you're looking at buying your own truck. Watch your pennies. I tell everybody, trucking it's a business of pennies, not dollars. And you have to take that mindset, because, you have a really good week, and you might have, a $10,000 week now, but that's not yours. You can't just go out and blow it. You'll never have anything left. So
you could,
but you're not, when it comes time to make that big truck payment and trailer payment, and especially your insurance, you're going to be short. So, I think if you're going to be an owner operator, especially if you're taking that route and you're going to own your own equipment, then people need to take classes on finances and really learn how to manipulate. When I started, I had probably a 30 column, like an Excel spreadsheet. Down to the penny. Of what I would need, what I spent, everything like that. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be successful, because you have to track it all the time. just, watch your finances, and find a mentor, find a full-time mentor, somebody that's done this for a long time, and ask them, how did you make it this long, and how have you been successful? Find other people who are successful and surround yourself with those. And that goes for any craft, any career. In sales, I had a great mentor who's still out there today, and he's vice president at a company here in the U.S. And he was a mentor for a couple years while I was in sales and logistics management on a large account in Ohio.
Very cool.
Definitely find people, whether it's accountants, every kind of an accountant, attorneys, anything like that. There's an office called SCORE. I'll throw it out there, SCORE. And what it is, it's retired executives who give their time back to the public. And these SCORE offices are all over the country, and it's free. It's free. So it's the Service Corps of Retired Executives is what it stands for. And, I've spent probably 10, 15 hours at SCORE offices before, and it's free advice. And, you can find a mentor at SCORE offices. And this is great for people who want to start their own business or just learn more about a certain craft.
That's actually great information. SCORE offices. Okay. I'm actually writing that down. Cool. So, hey, Drake, this has been great so far. Any specific shout outs you want to give the folks? Like, again, you mentioned a couple mentors, just anybody that you want to just send one out to before we close this thing down.
Yeah, I'd say Don Farthing, who mentored me a lot at Market Transport and Market Logistics when he was there at Market in Portland, Oregon. I drove for someone when he had 4 trucks. Now he has like 700 trucks and 1,000 trailers or more. And that's Russ Gottemaller, Continental Express owner, CEO, owner there. So Russ is a great guy. He's got a super company. Gave me an opportunity, back around 1979 to be a driver when I was pulling produce. So, big shout out to Russ.
Yeah. Very cool. So, Russ, go ahead.
It's funny you say that. It kind of reminds me. I think there's a saying that a couple of people on here have said is like, they maybe haven't said these words, but there's really no such thing as being self-made, right? You're made by the people around you. And it sounds like you've had an experience of not only having people around you, but it also sounds like you've done a bit of paying it forward as well. I think that's really great.
Yeah, that's what it takes. People, like you say, nobody's really self-made. You've looked at, and I still follow people to get, what I want to say, some motivation, and I have anywhere from Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, I'm ex-military, to Green Berets and their sayings, easy day was yesterday, man. Easy day was yesterday. Every day you got to get up and get going and get motivated and have goals and targets to hit. So I don't care if you're a driver, there's so many miles you need to hit. I always tried to do a minimum of 650 miles a day, minimum. There were days before deregulation, we could do 850 miles straight through, Dayton to Boston.
That's a lot. That's a lot of miles. Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, Paul, you're definitely right in that Drake is one of the people we've interviewed so far. We could definitely get a part 2 out of. I mean, we didn't even go into the fact that you served. You mentioned a couple times, so thank you for that service. Also you're an owner operator, ran your own business for a while. Now, again, you've been in the freight brokerage world, like you said, and you've taught. And you told me a really cool story about some people that you have taught. So a lot left to Drake Sliver's story. Hey, Drake, thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, we really appreciate you and your support. And thanks for tuning in. Please be sure to check us out on every other Tuesday is when episodes drop at What's Domiciled on YouTube and Spotify for full episodes and Instagram for the reels. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a great day.